Suspension Training Programming module. So the objectives of this presentation are to review the recommendations for training parameters specific to suspension system training exercises, and to give an example of how to structure a program that covers multiple sessions and is part of a periodized plan. So for most clients, the following recommendations would probably be most appropriate. You'd be looking at 2 to 3 whole body sessions per week, strength endurance training parameters, predominantly utilized in preparation phase training. You'd look to master the slow tempo exercises first, and also mastering the basic positions and exercises before integrating into more complex movements. So on the exercise selection, we're looking at choosing exercises that cover all of the movement patterns: the squat, lift, pull and press, rotation, smash, gait and locomotion, and movement and carry and load. And we'll look at how we can select different suspension exercises for each of these movement patterns in some of the following slides. So continuing on exercise selection, you want to make sure you focus on working a range of movement patterns within different sessions across the week or across different phases. You want to be aware of the grip requirements for many suspension system training exercises, things like bicep curls, rows, reverse wood chops, etc. As many users will kind of find their forearms fatigue prematurely because of weak grip. One of the key benefits of suspension training is that it overloads the stabilizers, core, hips, shoulder, scapula, more than the agonists or prime movers in comparison with equivalent exercises using other equipment like fixed path machines or maybe barbells. And this can help to correct the agonist synergist strength imbalances that we discussed in previous modules. So for the squat pattern initially, we can include suspension exercises such as the squat, which is a parallel stance movement, the pistol squat, which would be a single leg subgroup, lunges, backwards, lateral, reverse, crossover. We could do jumps, hops, lateral bounds. These would all get covered under the squat movement pattern. In addition to suspension training, it's a good idea to complement these suspension training exercises with heavier, more stable exercises such as a barbell front squat, and that'll help you to cover the most and achieve the highest level of functional capacity for that particular movement pattern. For the lift pattern, well, there are actually quite a limited number of suspension training exercises that cover this movement pattern. The main one that'll hit some of the same muscles is going to be suspension system curls or hamstring curls. But even then, it's not really a kind of lift pattern movement because it's a kind of open chain. So we can do the kind of isometric holds, we can do the bridging, we can do the full hamstring curls. And that's okay, but generally we'd want to complement these exercises with free weight lifting exercises, which we can do in a parallel stance, a split stance, single leg, step and reach, etc., in order to maximize our ability to form the lift. Now with the press pattern, we can do a variety of different pressing exercises. That would include the chest press, which is a horizontal press, the pike shoulder press, which is a vertical upwards press, press-ups and variations, again more horizontal pressing, and even dips, which is a downward press movement. So we can kind of cover, if you like, the kind of full spectrum of movement or vectors within that particular movement pattern. Still, again, we'd want to complement these exercises with the overhead press. Although technically it works the same thing as a pike shoulder press, we don't work the hip stabilizers as much because we don't have our feet planted on the ground. We'd also want to complement it with more stable exercises, barbell bench press, barbell push press, etc., in order to maximize our functional capacity. So with the pull movement pattern, there's a variety of different pulling movements we can do. Rows, as we kind of see with the image there. We can also do our kind of pull-ups, kind of L-shaped pull-ups. And again, we can complement these suspension system exercises with just standard bodyweight pull-ups. The main kind of subgroup of this movement, which is quite difficult to kind of train with a suspension system, is going to be a pulling upwards. So we would need to kind of complement it with something like high pulls, upright rows, something like that. Usually kind of with a free weight is preferable. And once we kind of include that within our programming, that should kind of cover all of the different subgroups or vectors for this particular movement pattern. So for the rotation movement, again, there's a variety of different suspension exercises we can use to kind of cover this. Reverse wood chops would be a diagonal upwards rotation. We've got a jackknife with rotation, which will cover the kind of downward rotation because we bring the knees up towards the body. And even the kind of single arm reach is more of a horizontal rotation. Again, we would want to cover these suspension exercises with things like seated or standing rotations to more comprehensively train the horizontal rotation pattern, and also kind of cable and band wood chops for a diagonal downwards movement would work effectively as well to get the most out of this functional capacity for this particular movement pattern. Then we have the smash pattern, so working the kind of anterior core. Again, we can do a number of different drills. We can do the jackknife with a crunch, we can do the lunge and overhead reach, both of which we kind of classify as this kind of smash pattern. Even a lot of the stabilization drills, the plank, the extending plank, etc., were kind of get grouped under this, probably as a supplementary exercise because they're more isometric. But again, we'd want to complement these suspension exercises with more dynamic smash exercises where we're actually releasing an object forwards or downwards. Sandbag slams, hammer slams onto a tire, sandbag forward throws, things like that would help us to comprehensively train this movement pattern. On the gait and locomotion side, well, this is strictly a bodyweight only pattern. So again, we want to ensure that we're complementing suspension training with walking, running, crawling, swimming. And again, there's arguments that could be made that some of the drills would kind of train some of these but again, we would look to try to do each of these additional types of movement in order to get the most out of our program. And then we have the moving and carry and load. And strictly speaking, there are no real kind of suspension system exercises that cover this movement pattern. So again, we'd want to complement with exercises such as the Turkish get-up, which would be a supine to standing section of this movement. Carrying objects where we're kind of holding them above our head, so like an overhead walk, maybe with a barbell, a kettlebell. Farmer's walk, where we're carrying it in the hands. Even sled exercises, pushing, dragging, etc. And again, once you kind of look at these exercises, you kind of see it is quite difficult to kind of mimic these with a suspension training system. So to kind of bring in some of the things we've mentioned previously, you'd want to include heavier, more stable exercises in order to complement these lighter suspension system movements, in order to help increase the applied functional strength for each particular movement pattern. So we see with the images there, these heavier movements will help us to increase the height of our functional pyramid. And then we'd also want to look to include exercises that complement some of the things we can't do with a suspension system, work in a particular movement pattern at different velocities with different planes, or even just with unstable objects like a sandbag or different bases such as unstable surface training like a BOSU, in order to complement the lighter suspension system movements. This will help us to increase the functional range for each movement pattern, but predominantly suspension system training is very good at improving the functional range, more so than the functional applied strength for each particular movement pattern. So on the programming side, on basic programming, start with the less complex, more stable exercises, squat, chest press, rows, things like that. We could then progress to more complex, more dynamic exercises, reverse crossover lunge, lateral step and overhead reach, etc. We want to build up the intensity gradually in order to help improve these weaker grip and the synergistic strength imbalances that need addressing. And you also want to understand which movement patterns cannot comprehensively be trained using suspension systems, and therefore look to complement those with other equipment, other exercises, or other modes of training. So as a quick review, here we have our kind of standard training parameters for different goals. Predominantly, we'd be using suspension training systems to help improve strength endurance, in which case we'd be looking at kind of 12 plus rep range, longer time under tension, shorter rest periods, and about 2 to 4 sets per exercise usually. We have given you examples how we can kind of manipulate some of these things if you do want to get more hypertrophy, but as a standard recommendation, that's probably what we're looking at. So we'll just show you an example 6 weeks beginner program, aim of which would be to practice some of the basic exercises as part of a whole body program, help to cover in all the different movement patterns. Prerequisites, we want to have mastered all the foundation exercises, just so we're not trying to teach them as well as kind of use them as part of our program. And we could do this in maybe kind of 6 weeks because we're going to be doing different exercises on different days of the week. So you can kind of see how we can try to cover all of the movement patterns and all of the subgroups of each of the movement patterns as well. So we're going to be performing 3 sessions a week, session 1A, 2A, 3A, weeks 1 to 6, and then on the 7th week we'd have a rest week with some active recovery. An example breakdown of the week, we could just do these sessions on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 whole body sessions, and like I said, we're looking at trying to cover all the movement patterns and all the different subgroups. So 1A on the suspension exercises, we could do pistol squats to work the squat pattern obviously, rows for pulling, chest press for the pressing movement, and then kind of link these in with other exercises. So we could do shoulder presses, standing rotations, seated calf raises, dumbbell, cable and kind of machine work. We're obviously not going to be able to cover all of the different subgroups of all of the movement patterns. So we kind of start off with this. We're doing, in this case, a couple of pressing and only 1 pulling, but we can use kind of look at balancing it out with some of the other sessions then. So session 2A, now we kind of include a lift pattern, so we could do a Romanian deadlift, for example. Link that in with dips to cover the another pressing movement. Step ups, again, slightly different squat movement pattern. Then we have pull-ups, jackknife with rotation for smash and rotation movements. Bicep curls, a supplementary exercise with a suspension system. And then a half get up using a kettlebell to cover the moving and carrying load. And then this final session, lateral lunges using a suspension system. So if you just kind of break down, let's say the squat pattern, we've done a single leg movement with a pistol squat. We've done a kind of single leg emphasis with a step up, and then a little bit more frontal plane. We're doing lateral lunges. We've got high pulls. We've linked that in with rows and pull-ups previously. We've got a kind of reverse fly now for a little bit more additional back work. Reverse wood chop to complement the other rotation stuff that we've done. Sled push for, again, a little bit more moving and carrying load. Got a pure smash pattern exercise, which we could do with a slam ball or sandbag. And then we've got a tricep extension. Again, just another supplementary exercise working the suspension system. So again, we're trying to cover each of the subgroups of the movement patterns. We've got some isometric exercises, some supplementary exercises, but that should be more than appropriate for a 6-week program for a beginner. So to review then, the objective of this presentation were to review the recommendations for training parameters specific to suspension system training exercises, and to give an example of how to structure a program that covers multiple sessions and is part of a periodized plan. So you want to complete the review questions for this module to ensure they met the learning outcomes, and then move on to the next module, which is the assessment side.